everyone. Very nice to be at the Sheffield Buddhist Centre. And so yes, I want to talk to you not about being good. But first of all, I thought, well, just to warm us up, I just ask you, why practice Buddhist ethics? So I thought I'd just ask you, and I'm going to ask Sajajota to be my scribe, and we'll just pop a few things up on the flip chart. So, why practice ethics? Any thoughts?
It makes you feel good.
It makes you feel good. Yes?
You sleep better at night.
You sleep better at night, great.
Makes other people
Makes other people
feel good.
Makes other people feel good, yeah, great.
Karma.
Karma, so say more when you say karma, what?
Purifying your karma.
Purifying your karma. And what do you mean when you say purifying your karma?
I guess dropping white seeds, simplifying the consequences that follow us and that cling to us.
Okay, yeah.
So
Yeah.
clearer state of mind.
Yeah. Yeah, so having a clearer state of mind. Yeah, great. Thank you.
It improves our relationships with other people.
Okay, yeah. Yeah, great. Sorry, I didn't hear that one?
Peace of mind.
Sorry, I'm still not hearing.
Peace of mind.
Peace of mind, yeah. Peace of mind, yeah.
Kind of ties in with the precepts, really, too, doesn't it?
It
Kind of ties in with the precepts, really.
ties in with the precepts. So,
Like,
what
if
do you
you're
mean by that?
Ethically, you're being generous.
Yeah, but why be generous? Why would you bother to be generous?
It's joyful, isn't it?
It's enjoyable, yeah.
It's enjoyable.
It's enjoyable, yeah.
So trying to cultivate a bigger state of mind.
Which state of mind?
Or trying to cultivate a more expansive state of mind.
And more expansive state of
An
mind.
enlightened state of mind.
An enlightened state of mind, yeah.
We're wanting to break down self and other.
Okay, yeah.
It's a natural state, actually.
It's a natural state, okay. Sorry, I'm not. It deepens your connection with others, yeah.
Running out of space.
Oh yeah, you've got big writing. Okay, we better just have a last couple. Last one or two?
Okay, last one is everybody wants enlightenment.
What's that? Everyone wants enlightenment?
One.
Yeah, everyone wants enlightenment, okay.
To root out greed, hatred and delusion.
Okay, and why would you want to do that?
Because only when you root those out have you got a chance of being enlightened.
Okay, right. Okay, so again, similar theme. Okay. Great. Well, thank you. We've got a very good list here, actually. It's good, isn't it? Well, again, it's good to sort of know this in our own experience collectively, that it does seem to have a lot of positive benefits to practice what we call ethics. And you could say, and this is what how I've sort of structured the book, one way I've structured the book is to kind of to have 3 levels of ethics. And I think between us, we've covered what I'm calling the 3 levels of ethics. So I'll say what they are, and then I'll spend the rest of the talk talking about them, and then I'm hoping there's a chance for questions and answers, and then we'll be having groups as well. So so the 3 levels. So the very first level is when you realise it is in your own interest, if you like, to act unselfishly. Yes, so you realise that it makes you feel good, you sleep better, you've got a clearer state of mind, a clearer conscience, yeah? That's not to say it's easy. always to practice generosity, so there might be a struggle, but you feel the benefits, and especially if you reflect on them and you feel that the benefits make it worth it. And then this, what I'm calling the second level of ethics, springs out of your natural empathy with other people. So you realise, well, yeah, it's not all about me, it makes other people feel good as well. It improves your relationships with other people, it deepens your connections with other people. And those first two, I mean, they're very, very good reasons to practice ethics, and lots of people will practice generosity and kindness for these reasons. They don't, you know, Buddhist or not, you know, in a sense, you know, Buddhists haven't got a monopoly on practicing what we're calling ethics for those reasons. In the third and highest level, you're trying to go even beyond that. Yeah, you're going beyond practicing ethics for your own benefit, and in a sense, even for the benefit of other people on that level. What you're doing is well, the classic answer would be for the sake of enlightenment, as some people have said. So if you try to think, well, what does that mean? You could say it means having sort of transcended yourself so much that you no longer experience selfish motivations at all. In a sense, you don't need to practice ethics anymore, that it has become for you natural. It might not be natural in the beginning, but from the point of view of enlightenment, it will be a natural state of being. An enlightened being would naturally act in ways that we call ethical. Although it's natural, it's not sort of guaranteed, as it were. You know, to move from those first two levels, if those first two levels are, you know, close together, like my hands just a few inches apart, the third level is probably like about, I don't know, a mile away or something. You know, there's a long way to go to that third level. But that's what we're trying to do with our Buddhist practice of ethics. We're trying to, yeah, as I say, transcend so much that we're not experiencing selfish motivations at all. That's going to take commitment. It's going to take practice. It's going to take being receptive to people wiser than ourselves. It's not just a flick of a switch, it's the complete turning around in our deepest being. Yeah, that's what we're trying to do with the practice of ethics. We're letting go of our instinctive self-referential mode. We're trying to turn around our very instincts, yeah? Our usual mode is instinctively self-referential, but Buddhism teaches that we can transform even that we can start to see things without kind of me in the middle of it all. Yeah? So that's what we're trying to do. So yeah, I'm going to use what we've discovered together and use that little bit I've said and sort of unpack that for the rest, for the next half hour or so. And I'm going to do it using a poem. It's one of my favourite poems, and it's a poem by Ted Hughes, who was the Poet Laureate in England, and it's called New Foal. So, for the rest, yeah, as I say, for the rest of this time, I'm going to talk about this poem. So the poem New Foal starts in quite an ordinary way. So it starts in the way of an ordinary nature poem. He lived on a farm, Ted Hughes, a lot of the time, and he wrote a lot of poems about farmyard animals. Like sheep and cattle and horses. So in this poem, a foal is born. Yesterday he was nowhere to be found, in the skies or under the skies. Suddenly he's here. Yeah, so quite straightforward so far. Quite beautiful, but quite straightforward. And the poem goes on to describe this little foal finding its feet, literally, standing up on its legs, connecting with its mother, starting to experience all the physical sensations, the wind, its mother licking it, and so on. And we're told soon he'll be almost a horse. So, yes, as I say, this is quite ordinary up to this point. What we're involved in is happening in the natural world within the world of the senses, within time, within space. And although that's ordinary, it's important, and if we kind of translate that, if we map that onto our practice of ethics, our practice of Buddhist ethics, it's important to realise, first of all, and Bhante Sangha is very keen to emphasise this, that the practice of ethics is something natural. It's not something that we're trying to graft onto ourselves in an unnatural way. It's something natural. And I wanted to tell you a little story that comes from another piece of literature that is quite evocative. In a way, it talks of the opposite of this, but in doing so, it evokes it. So, the story of ethics in a sort of in a negative sense, the way that we might, if we've been brought up in certain traditions, think of ethics, is illustrated to me by a character in a story in a novel by Coetzee, the South African writer, and the novel's called Disgrace. You might have read it. Won the Nobel. Well, no, he won some prize. I think he won the Nobel Prize. The story's within a story. The main character is telling the story of this dog. It's a beautiful golden retriever, and it's kept in the backyard of some neighbours. But the trouble is, every time a female dog comes along, this dog is like terribly excited and aroused, as you can imagine, and all excitable. And what the owners do at that point is they beat the dog. So every time the dog is excited, they beat the dog. And this goes on and on with great regularity. And then something kind of awful happens. And what happens is that as soon as the dog smells the female dog and gets all excited, it simultaneously starts to quiver and cower, even before it's been beaten. So what the guy telling the story said, it doesn't even need the punishment anymore because it's ready to punish itself. And he said that the dog has now become afraid of its own nature and ready to punish its own nature. So it's quite it's quite evocative, isn't it? And so that's not what Buddhist ethics is trying to make us do. Buddhist ethics is not trying to make us afraid of our own nature, any part of our own nature. It's not trying to sort of beat us into submission. It's not there to punish us. It's not trying to get us to punish ourselves. There's another bit to the story in which the guy who's telling the story is telling it to his daughter, and the daughter said, oh, well, maybe they should have just castrated the dog. That would have sort of sorted it out. And he's horrified, he's horrified. And he said, oh, I think the dog would rather have been shot than to spend the rest of its days just padding around the living room. So again, that's very evocative, isn't it? And also so just as Buddhist ethics isn't trying to get us to punish ourselves, it's not trying to get us to kind of, what would the equivalent be for us? Just kind of the dogs being castrated. It's not trying to get us to cripple ourselves. It's not going to try to get us to sort of pacify and domesticate ourselves so that we're just padding around, not doing any harm, but not really alive, yeah? So again, that's quite important. Well, it's very important to me. It's something that Bhante Sangha has stressed again and again. That the first thing we've got to do with our ethical life, with our dharma life, is to be a happy, healthy human being. Yeah? It's not about being less than a human being. It's not about deforming and crippling and punishing ourselves or domesticating and taming ourselves. Yeah. So that's so the fact of this little foal growing up into being a horse, although it sounds ordinary, it's important that we want to just grow and develop in a natural way. That's our first step. But there's more than that. Yeah, there's more than that. So in the next lines of the poem, we move into a new dimension. So we've had soon he'll be almost a horse. Now we have he wants only to be horse, pretending each day more and more horse, till he's perfect horse. So something different happens here. So before you've had a horse, now horse, the word is given a capital H and the little a is taken away, yeah? So we're no longer hearing about a horse in time and space, but about archetypal horse, ideal horse, capital H horse, yeah? And the foal wants only to be horse. Yeah? That's the entirety of its longing, that's all it wants. So again, if we map this onto Buddhism, we could say, well, for Buddhists, the ideal person is the Buddha. So the Buddha is the archetype. As we know very well, the Buddha was born an ordinary human being, through his own efforts, realised this state we call enlightenment, and became the refuge, became the archetype, became enlightened, with a capital E, you know. And so that's the archetype. And then it's interesting, this little foal wants only to be horse. That's the entirety of its longing. What this reminds me of is the vision that you might remember that the Buddha had upon the night of his enlightenment. And he saw all humanity like lotuses in a lotus pond, didn't he? And there was the little sort of lotuses in the mud, hardly grown, and then the lotuses that had grown up out of the mud, but they were still buds, and then the fully opened lotuses. And what he saw in that vision was that all, just as any lotus, even though it's down in the mud, has the potential to become a fully opened lotus, all humanity, any human being can become a Buddha. Again, not automatic, but in potential, yeah? And obviously it takes a lot of, a lot of effort and transcendence, but any human being, any living being actually has the potential to become a Buddha. But what's more, the Buddha saw in this vision that somewhere we know that, yeah, even if we don't consciously know it. What he saw was that we'll never be fully satisfied until we reach our highest potential. So that, of course, isn't to say that there's nothing at all pleasurable or satisfying about life, but that until enlightenment, until Buddhahood, there'll always be a sense of, oh, there could be more. Yeah, somewhere there'll be a sense of there could be more. And actually, where we feel that sense, we need to cherish it, because it's that keeps us growing. So just as the little foal wants only to be horse, somehow the foal knows there is this archetypal horse that it can be. Somehow it knows that. Who knows how? And once it knows that, that's all it wants. So once we know it, that we could be more, we mustn't rest really, or we'll never be happy. That's when we talk about dukkha, that's what dukkha is really. It's not that, as I said, there's no satisfaction or no pleasure, but there's this, we haven't realised until we've realised our fullest potential, there will be that dukkha of knowing there could be more. And, so the pretending each day more and more horse till he's perfect horse. So this is interesting, isn't it? This word pretend. So how he gets to be horse, archetype, capital H, is by pretending each day more and more horse. So I just want to look at this word pretend, because I think Ted Hughes is using it in a particular way here. So often we use it, and maybe more often than not, we use the word pretend to mean something like play act or even being a bit hypocritical. But I don't think that is what Ted Hughes means here. The word pretend, I've looked this up in the Oxford English Dictionary, so I know for sure, also means to stretch or to reach forward. Like tend, so pretend, it means to reach forward, to direct your course. And that's what the foal is doing. It's moving towards the archetype, it's setting its course. And again, that's what we do as Buddhists. We have our archetype, the Buddha, And we move towards that archetype by pretending, by acting as if. What we call ethics is simply the way a Buddha, an enlightened being, would naturally act. I know Vidanya's told me you've been studying the stories of the Buddha and the life story of the Buddha over the past number of weeks. So it's great that we've got that, we've got the means to study that. And we do that. Like, we don't just study those stories and so on because they're nice stories. We're doing that, that's because they're teaching us. We can see the way the Buddha acted. We can see, well, how does an enlightened being respond to, well, all the situations, for example, that presented themselves to the Buddha. So in some of the stories, for example, you've got the Buddha meeting a grieving mother, Kissa Gotami, whose baby's died. The Buddha responds to her in the most skillful way imaginable. It sees, everyone else is there trying to respond, but the Buddha, manages to respond and transforms the situation. The same when the Buddha meets a mass murderer, Angulimala, or a sick monk, or a drunken lord, the Buddha responds. And we can learn from that. So if we look to see, well, what does kindness in action look like, or generosity? If we practice those qualities, if we act the way an enlightened being would act, that actually modifies our consciousness. So I think that's one of the things when I first started learning about the Dharma that really excited me. That just as their states of mind affect the way we act affects our states of mind. I don't think I'd really grasped that before. I used to be a Catholic when I was a little girl, and I used to go to confession a lot. But then as soon as I came out of confession, I'd just do all the little sins, being rude to my mum, being arguing with my sisters. Again, I had no notion of transforming myself. I just thought, well, you did these sins, and then you went to confession, and they all got wiped away, but then you went and did them again. Whereas Buddhism is saying something quite different. It's saying, that if we act differently, our minds will change. And then our minds will change, and then we'll act differently. So you get this positive spiral effect. And Bante's got a lovely analogy for this. He says, you might know this if you've read A Survey of Buddhism. He says it's like a poet and a poem. So he says, just as a poet, or any artist it could be, as an outflowing of their inspiration, writes a poem, and that's a kind of natural, that's just a natural outpouring. And then we come along, maybe not so inspired, but we pick up the poem and read it and immerse ourselves in it. We're uplifted, aren't we? We move nearer, a little bit nearer to the state of the poet, to the inspiration of the poet. Or as I say, it could be painting or whatever. And he says, well, it's just like that. He says the Buddha is like the poet. So the Buddha, out of his inspiration, just acts. We come along, maybe we're not feeling inspired, maybe we're not feeling inspired at all, we might have a hangover, we might have just woken up in a bad mood, we might just not feel like it, but if we recall the Buddha and those stories of the Buddha and act the way a Buddha would act, then that's like reading the poem, that's like partaking of the poem, and our consciousness is raised. And I think it's interesting to really sort of reflect on that and take it on, and to realise that it might not feel natural. It won't feel natural. We might not be in the mood for it, but that doesn't mean not to do it. It might feel self-conscious at first, and I've got another poetic example that I think illustrates this well. It's from Seamus Heaney, who sadly died recently, and he's also talking about writing a poem, but I think you can map this back onto our practice of ethics. And he's talking about, when you just start off writing. And he says that learning the craft is beginning to turn the windlass at the well of poetry. So the windlass is the windy chain, the chain that you wind round. So turning the windlass of the well of poetry. So the bucket drops down, and he says usually you begin by dropping the bucket halfway down the shaft and winding up a taking of air. In other words, there's no water in the bucket, there's just air. And he says you're miming the real thing until one day the chain draws unexpectedly tight and you have dipped into waters that will continue to entice you back. You'll have broken the skin on the pool of yourself. So that's lovely, isn't it? And again, it really echoes what Ted Hughes says in the poem, pretending each day more and more hoarse. Here you got Seamus Healy saying, you're miming the real thing. So you've got to keep doing it, even though you don't really feel like it. But then one day, and it's unexpected, I love that, you don't know when, the chain draws unexpectedly tight. And then you've dipped into waters that will continue to entice you back. So that's your momentum started up of practicing. And you'll have broken the skin on the pool of yourself, which that's rather lovely, I think. And when you get that water, something's changed. So you've moved from just practicing, even perfecting the craft, to something else. And Seamus Heaney calls that a state of dynamic alertness. That's what we're trying to get to. That's what the Buddha had when he met Kisagotami. That dynamic alertness that knows what to do. No one else knows what to do, but he knows what to do because he's just so sensitive and so alert and so responsive. That's what we're trying to train ourselves for want of a better word. And we've got to just do the training. We've got to keep winding that bucket down, and then one day we'll get water. And then it'll start to become more natural to us. So that's how the little foal moves more and more towards being horse. And that's how we move more and more towards being the Buddha. Pretending each day. And then it's pretending each day more and more horse till he's perfect horse. So I really like that it's day by day. Yeah? So it's not wishful thinking. It's not kind of stop, start. It's just this patient, steady, persistent effort, day by day. And that's the law of karma, like you said. That's when we're doing that, we're trusting in the law of karma. Yeah, that day by day effort, seeing the consequences, seeing the state of mind that we get to. Yeah. So until he's perfect horse. So I want to pause on perfect as well. Because I think this is very interesting, this notion of perfection. So we talk about the Buddha as the perfection of the human, or we could talk about the Buddha as the perfection of the human, but we've got to be very careful to know that this doesn't mean that the Buddha's reached some sort of end point. Again, Bhante's very, very keen on stressing this. Bhante says that, in fact, for something to be perfect, it has to be reaching beyond itself. It has to be constantly transcending, if you like. It has to be being constantly reborn. And that means, kind of somewhat paradoxically, that for something to be perfect, it has to be imperfect. Do you see what I mean? Because it's always got to be reaching beyond, yeah? And Bhante, in one seminar, he says, well, you can't really say that there's room for improvement in a Buddha, but he says there will be always room for further expression. I really like that as well, that the enlightenment will always find new ways of expressing itself. It's enlightenment's a state of constant creativity. It's always pointing beyond itself. The total process is always unfinished. And I think you can see this in terms of ethics, and particularly in terms of the precepts, like someone mentioned. I think you can see this most clearly in the positive precepts, that we recite. And I think this is, it's a real gift that Bhante's given us, and a real gift in Triratna that we do recite these positive precepts. So, as we know, the precepts in their Pali form are recited all over the Buddhist world, which is a wonderful way of connecting us with the whole Buddhist world. And it's lovely, isn't it? You go to different countries such as India and so on to hear them chanted. As far as I know, the positive precepts are quite particular to Triratna. The fact that we recite with deeds of loving kindness, I purify my body, they're particular to us. And they weren't even recited right back at the beginning. It's interesting, if you look back at the old seminars, you can see them kind of coming in, and you can see the conversations where they're saying, oh yeah, let's start saying these, this is really good, you know, and how exactly should we phrase these ones, you know. And I think that's quite, well, it's quite good not to take that for granted. It really is something that Bhante's given us. And apparently Bhante said once that the positive precepts are the real precepts. I think he said that in a personal conversation to someone, who then told me, and I did ponder about this, I thought, I wonder why he said that, so I don't know for sure. But my guess is that it's because of this thing that in the positive precepts particularly, you get this sense of the infiniteness, the infinite scope. Because if you think of a quality like generosity, well, how could you ever come to an end of it? You can never come to an end of the expression of it, of the practice of it, of the way it would manifest, depending on who you met, what state they were in. The same with kindness, truthfulness, contentment, mindfulness, all the positive speech precepts, harmonising speech and so on. There can never be an end to them. All there could be is just more and more refinement and more and more sort of delicacy, sensitivity, sort of power in a way to the way you applied them. And yeah, I think, you know, you could get that in the negative form of the precepts, but I think you're more likely to get it when thinking of the positive precepts, that sense. And this is, it's very, very important that, because again it helps us to really feel in our own experience that enlightenment isn't a static thing and can never be a static thing. It's never going to be a static thing. It's always going to be evolving further and further. Yes, I think again that you've got that dynamic alertness. Again, I think Satyajyoti mentioned the title of the book, Not About Being Good, and I think this quality of alertness and responsiveness kind of addresses, well, this danger of being good, of thinking ethics is about being good. Elsewhere, Bhante says, he said, oh, sometimes you meet people who are like a good person. He says you can't fault their ethics. They're probably not breaking any of the precepts in the negative sense. But he says there's something a bit dead about them. You know, while you can't fault them, they're not really kind of fully alive. You know, they're a bit more concerned with doing the right thing. They lack that creativity, that spontaneous responsiveness, that courage, really. So again, I think really focusing on the positive precepts can help us to get far beyond merely being a good person. A good person really isn't it. That's not what we're trying to do. Yeah, we're trying to be alive, not good, you know. So, yes, I'm going to tell you another. There's very, very many poets that sort of talk about this. I'll tell you a little thing that Picasso says that kind of also connects with this. He says there are painters who transform the sun into a yellow spot, but there are others who, thanks to their art and their intelligence, transform a yellow spot into the sun. So there are painters who transform the sun into a yellow spot, but there are others who, thanks to their art and their intelligence, transform a yellow spot into the sun. I think this is the same message, put more poetically. To me, this says, if we look to Buddhism or any religion for sort of stock answers for what should we do, what shouldn't we do, then we're reducing the sun, this glorious sun, down into a yellow spot, yeah? But if we train ourselves as intelligently as we can in kindness and generosity and these truly human values, then we make our mind and heart more agile. We've got a better chance of responding creatively. That whatever life kind of throws at us, whoever life throws at us, whatever state they're in, then we're transforming the yellow spots of our actions into the sun. It's completely different from a sort of tick list approach to practice of anything, where we're just ticking off the precepts, or completely different from a sort of bargaining or bookkeeping approach that we can often have, I think, particularly in relation to ethics. We can start looking to what other people are doing and thinking, oh, well, she does that, so it's all right if I do it, or da-da-da. And that's missing the point. That's turning the sun into a yellow spot. Yeah, we can't, there's no... It's kind of missing the point of ethics in the true Buddhist sense if we sort of start bargaining like that. It can't be about that. It's about something much, much, much more than that. Much more exciting than that. Much more exciting. So this little foal has transformed himself to become perfect horse. So one might be forgiven to think once he's become perfect horse that's the end of the matter. But it's not the end, and it's not the end for us either. So something else happens, which I'll just read you, and I won't say much about. So we've had pretending each day more and more horse till he's perfect horse. Then unearthly horse will surge through him, weightless, a spinning of flame under sudden gusts. It will coil his eyeball and his heel in a single terror, like the awe between lightning and thunderclap. So, to me, this says that it's as if becoming perfect horse has been the necessary preparation for something from an entirely other dimension, unearthly horse, to descend and totally transform this little foal. And, well, his eyeball and his heel are coiled in a single terror. Well, I think this shows us that that experience is shocking. That everything known, if you like, is burnt up and blown away, and a new realm is entered that's infinitely vaster. And to me, this poem gives a hint about what our practice of ethics is really about, or could be really about if we wanted to. So we start off, we refine our sensibilities, we become more and more alive to ourselves, the world around us, we become more and more truly human. But all this preparation means we'll be ready for something that will feel as if it's a force coming beyond ourselves, and that if we allow ourselves to go with it, will carry us on to greater and greater fulfillment. And that's a completely natural process. That's the capacity for enlightenment. That's part of the way things are, completely natural, and our work is to practice ethics and then practice receptivity, to be open to that, open to something that will feel as if it's coming beyond us, and let that take us even further. So that's my whirlwind tour of what I've called the 3 levels of ethics. So I finished in time for you to ask me questions, I think. I think we're having groups at past, that's right, isn't it? So, there's 15 whole minutes. Good, I've done very well. Finished in time. So, it's your turn now. You can, if there's any point you want to discuss or any question you'd like to ask me.
The eyeball and the heel recoiling in terror, that thing, is that about that, how terrifying it can be to step into that? If I don't behave in the way that I usually do.
Ah, yes, yeah.
If I do something different.
Yeah.
That's really scary, isn't it? Who would I be if I did that?
Absolutely.
And that's why I don't do it. 'Cause
Yes.
It's unfamiliar.
Yeah, so it's interesting, isn't it? So Terry's just saying that, even though, well, I'm sort of paraphrasing you, but even though the things we often do are often painful, often we know they're causing us pain, we're afraid to step beyond that, because a step beyond that is always a step into the unknown, and that's always going to have some degree of fear with it. And I think the best thing to do is get used to that fear in a way, almost I find just to try and embrace that fear and almost go, oh yes, you again. That's bound to happen. Any step we take forward in our Dharma lives will, in a way, I think it's a positive thing if fear comes up, because it's showing us we're moving into an unknown region. And I think we can have that sense of, who would I be? I have that quite a lot when I think of my deeply habitual tendencies like irritation and so on. I'm so defined by them. Although they cause me and certainly others a lot of pain, I think, what would be left without these? So somehow one's got to trust that something new and positive will come in. But that's an act of trust. So that's why you could see these are spiritual death and spiritual rebirth practices, the practices of letting go and letting something new, in a sense, take us over. It feels like something's taken us over. I mean, we mustn't get too literal about that. I guess it still starts to sound a bit weird, but it can feel like that, yeah.
It's great image.
Yeah, it's a great poem, isn't it? Yeah. Any other questions?
I've got a question. So
Yes.
when we have found ourselves behaving in a way which doesn't fit with how we'd like to behave ethically,
Yeah.
what kind of how is it good to behave? If you see what I mean, how's it good to move on from that experience if you find yourself behaving in a way you're not happy with?
Yeah. Well, I think, so that question was, I've been asked to repeat the question. So the question is, what do we do when we find ourselves behaving in a way that we are not happy with, that's gone against our values? Well, the first thing is to be pleased that we've noticed, actually. Because the very fact that we've noticed we've gone against our values, well, it means at least two things. It means that we've got values in the first place, and it means we've got enough awareness to notice we've gone against them. Subhuti, another teacher in Triratna, he talks about this. There's a Buddhist word for this, this feeling we feel when we've gone against our values. You might know it's hri. And he talks about it as the spark we feel when our actions go against our values. It causes a spark, and that spark is hri. And the feeling of hri is very painful, but it's very positive. So that it's very important to realise that something can be both painful and positive. Often we conflate positive and pleasant. And I think this is one of the biggest mistakes we can make in our Dharma life. We think that being in a positive mental state means feeling pleasure. It might mean that, but certainly in the case of hri, it doesn't. Or in the case of that dukkha, when you know there's something more, that's a positive impulse, but it's not a pleasant feeling. But if we stick with hri just now, the first thing is to be pleased you've noticed it, and to know that it's positive. I talk quite a lot in the book. I've got a whole chapter that distinguishes this positive hri from the negative state of guilt. So I could give a whole talk on that, the difference between hri and guilt. Guilt is not positive. Guilt is a sort of paralysing feeling where you've done something, you feel bad, you think you're going to be found out, you think everybody's going to not like you, and you just get yourself in a terrible state. That's not positive. But hri is positive. Hri is just that clean feeling of knowing I've gone against my values. So also another important thing when you feel that is try and distinguish what it is you're feeling. It might be a mixture of the two. That's quite important as well, and there's a few sort of ways to help you distinguish. One, you could just ask yourself, well, have I actually done anything unskillful? And maybe even try and identify that. If you're familiar with the 5 or 10 precepts, you could ask yourself, well, have I broken one of the precepts? And if you have, then what you're feeling is probably free rather than guilt. Because guilt's just about pernicious. It just you can just end up feeling it all the time. You don't even know what you've done, and you've not even done anything. Another little rule of thumb is that free is usually in connection with the other person. Usually we're unskillful in relation to another person, so free is usually a concern for the other person, whereas guilt is usually a concern with yourself, in the sense of, yeah, people are going to punish me or not like me or something. So that's the first step, is to distinguish whether it's free or guilt. And then what you need to do is, well, I could give a long answer or a short answer, but the short answer is, if you have gone against your values, by definition it's because you've lost some inspiration. So what you've got to do is just find a way back to your inspiration, whatever that is for you. So you know, again, this is where you've got to use your own intelligence. So for some people it might be meditating, for some people it might be talking to a friend who they find inspiring, it might be reading some inspiring work. You've got to find your way back to inspiration and then just move on. Obviously, you might need to make amends if you've hurt somebody or damaged their property or something. You need to make amends. There is, of course, the practice of confession, which is a whole other subject, but you need to, it's quite pragmatic really. You sort of realise that you've lost your inspiration, then you just get your inspiration back. If people are familiar with the Sevenfold Puja, you've got a series of verses and you've got confession of faults followed by rejoicing in merit. So that's not an accident, that's because once you've acknowledged what you've done that goes against your values, you re-inspire yourself by rejoicing in the positive in the world. Yeah, but if you want to know more, I've got it's a very dear theme to my heart, the whole theme of guilt and remorse and what's the difference, and yeah, something I've worked with a lot, struggled with a lot, yeah. Yes?
So I was curious about what you said about there being some pitfalls in ethics.
Yeah.
Sort of becoming quite rule-bound and I think you said a bit lifeless. And,
yes.
In a way, though, what we're advocating is following rules that are formal practice, and how do we know if we're following rules in the right way or following rules in the wrong way?
Yeah, so I'll just repeat the question. The question is about, so the pitfalls in ethical practice are following rules in the wrong way and becoming lifeless. And the question is, well, how can you tell? Because there are precepts which are guidelines, so how can you tell? And there's not a quick answer to that, because we're told in Buddhism that the precepts are not rules, but depending on our temperament, well, actually not just depending on our temperament, most people, especially in the West, with a Western upbringing, will tend to allow even the Buddhist precepts, no matter how many times they're told they're not rules, degenerate into rules. And then faced with a set of rules, you're going to do one of two things depending on your temperament. You're either going to try and conform to them because you want to be good and have people's approval, or you're going to rebel against them because you're going to go, oh, I hate rules and I'm not following anyone's rules. But in a sense, that's just the other side of the conformist coin. Neither is true practice. So the answer requires quite a lot of subtlety, use of a lot of subtlety and a lot of intelligence and a lot of asking yourself and your friends all the time. It's sort of knowing which way you tend and just reminding yourself, I think, perhaps coming back to one's values. Like there's, again in the book, I'm not trying to say this just to advertise the book, but there's, there's some very simple reflections, like actually reflecting upon your own actions and the consequences of them for yourself. So very simple reflection, where you just reflect on a time you were unkind. How did that actually feel? What was the effect on myself? What was the effects on other people? That's what I mean by using your intelligence. The more you can come from that sense, the more you realise, it makes sense to be generous. The way we came up with, in a sense, from the inside out. Yeah. So you've got to keep meditating. You've got to keep referring to asking your friends, and you've got to keep just knowing yourself well enough to know, I've let that become a rule again. I mean, you'll know when you've let it become a rule, because you'll tend to be judgmental on yourself and other people. You'll blame other people. You start pointing the finger and saying, oh, she's not vegetarian, or she flew on an aeroplane, da da da. As soon as you've done that, you've let them degenerate into rules. And then you need to maybe come back to a reflection that gets you in touch with the values of them. And at the same time, sometimes you won't feel I'm not kind of advocating a path of just do what you feel like, because sometimes, as I say, we won't feel like practicing, but we do it anyway. But you've got to do that consciously. You've got to at least be saying, okay, I don't feel like being generous, but I'm going to practice generosity because I have at least enough faith to know that it would transform my own state, it'll help other people. But you've got to be doing that consciously for yourself, not doing it because you think, I don't know, that's the right thing to do because you come to the Buddhist Centre. So basically you've got to have your wits about you. I can't just give you a straight answer to that, but that's good, that's the whole point, that you've got to just keep your wits about you all the time. I don't know, does that help?
I think so. It sounds like you're saying to sort of stay in touch with actually why it matters.
Yes, yeah. Stay in touch with why it matters, but also sometimes you'll be out of touch with why it matters and know what to do in those times as well. Because even when you're not in touch, you don't want to just run riot, because you do a lot of damage to yourself and other people. So then you need to, but maybe putting yourself in conditions as well to keep you in touch. We're very influenced by the conditions we're in, so, going on retreat, coming to the Buddhist Centre and so on, that help us to stay in touch. In a way, that's what effective practice is to, even if we can't always be in touch, because if we were, we'd be, a stream entrant or enlightened. We need to know what we need to get ourselves back in touch and have that set up in advance. The Buddha talked about this quality called apramada. That was his last words, with apramada, strive on, and that's like ethical vigilance. So to have that vigilance that is always on the alert for what might trip you up. And it can trip you up in a number of ways. It can trip you up into just being a good person, it can trip you up into, being out and out unskillful. Yeah. Yes. Just check the time. Yes, we've got time. Good.
Cool. So my experience with practicing ethics is sort of my levels of sensitivity fluctuate.
Okay.
If I've just been to the Buddhist Centre or whatever, or I'm in a better state of mind, I'm more ethically sensitive, and there's bound to be other times where I'm not sensitive.
Yeah.
And I might set myself some goals when I'm feeling more inspired.
Yeah.
That at other times I just can't be as in touch with. And if I've set myself like something I'm going to aim to do, when I'm feeling inspired, I just want to do it. But when I'm not, I sometimes feel quite resentful. And what you said about sort of being good and like losing that, feeling a bit dead. It can feel like that. Yeah. So I wondered if you got any tips on in those times where you're not feeling as naturally in touch with your ethics. Maybe when you're busy, all of that, you haven't got time to reflect as much. How can you continue to practice them while not feeling dead, while not just being good?
Well, I mean, what you've described describe sounds really positive. In a way, it sounds like what you're saying is, when you're feeling inspired and naturally ethical, you set yourself some precepts maybe, or some goals for the times when you don't feel so inspired. So that's a sort of so far so good. I mean, that's a good thing. But then you end up feeling a bit resentful. I mean, maybe you could ask yourself, well, who are you resent? I mean, because it's interesting that it's you yourself that have set yourself those goals, isn't it? So in a sense, maybe you could just remind yourself of why you did it, why you set this, what the benefits are. That would be one thing. And, I mean, maybe you need to lower your standards a bit. But also you do want to have some stretch, You can't rely on always feeling positive in order to be practicing. There will be times when you don't. So maybe it's not to expect to always feel inspired. Like sometimes it will just be a bit of a slog. Seamus Heaney talking about dropping that bucket down the well. Sometimes it's just a bit of a slog. There's no water. But as long as you're inspired enough, it can't all be a slog, or else that would be no good. So again, probably without sort of talking more in depth personally, because it sounds like you've definitely got times of inspiration where you are very in touch. So you need to make sure you've got both. There'll be times when you're inspired, that's great, and times when it feels a bit more like a slog. But that's part of it. Like I remember Bhante said, like if a monk takes on to do 50,000 prostrations, he doesn't expect to feel inspired at every single one. Sometimes you've just got to keep going. But it can't all, I'm sort of repeating myself now, but it can't all be a slog, or else there'd be no joy in your spiritual life. So just work out so you've got enough inspiration, but sometimes it'll just feel like hard work and you feel like you're not getting anywhere. But trust that is still sort of working that muscle. You can maybe just try and reflect on positive actions will always have positive consequences, even if you don't feel them at the moment. And maybe reflect on that in your more inspired times. I don't know if that helps, or yeah. Yeah. And be realistic in your aims, give yourself something that you can actually do, that is a stretch, but that is realistic enough for you to do. And then you can always, you could assess it and think, well, I've taken on too much. I suppose you want to, you're trying to get it so that it's not so easy that you're just not practicing, but not so difficult that you're discouraged and resentful. Great, so I think maybe it's, thank you, I think we're going to, thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.